kind of important topic today, covering social rights as an example of public interest journalism. So right now, I would like to understand. Do we have all the participants? So your names look different in the Zoom meeting. So Vitaliy Muzychenko, Deputy Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine. Svitlana Ostapa should be somewhere. And also Oleksandra Holub from National Consultant of the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine, and Halina Tretyakova, Chair of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Social Policy and Protection of Veterans' Rights. And I think that we can, in any order, actually speak. My first question, because we speak in the context of war in Ukraine, in the context of what is happening for the 7th year in Donbass. We always speak about the war in the military sphere, or everything that's connected with the military, but how certain social rights of people were lost, and who is ready to start first. I guess I will ask questions to all of you. The social, very often in Ukrainian space, there's a question about social rights, and in the context that there are clients, people want, there are many talks and conversations about populism, when people want something from the state, but the state cannot give everything. So in our case, how can we say it? Are the social rights, are the rights the obligation of the state, or people are certain clients that can either be provided these rights or not, especially in the conditions of the conflict? What do you think is the better, construction? How do we build it better when the part of the society is very much afraid of the populism and saying that the state cannot provide everything? It's populism. But what are social rights in this context? What is your definition? So I would like for you to speak briefly. We shall speak about without speeches, but Vitaliy, Mr. Muzychenko, I will give you the floor first because you're from the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine. So please, how would you formulate it? So 2, 3, or 4 minutes tops, and then you will have the possibility to talk about everything that you have prepared during this conversation. Thank you for giving me a word. Good day to all of you. Well, if we speak about the events that we are going through for the past years. Of course, you can consider social rights or social sphere apart from the rest, but you have to view it as a complex. Because if we say about that there are occupied territories, the rights of the citizens living on the territories are violated, then the state cannot protect its citizens, not from the point of view of the safety, not from the social rights or health. And we are to create the favorable conditions to provide the implementation of these rights on the territory controlled by Ukraine. And that is the fact that we can start with. Second aspect, I would like to draw attention to its pandemics, lockdown, coronavirus. And this lockdown is happening in almost every country of the world, and every country is using certain elements. And us as the government, or those who should have offered the, regime in which we live today, we of course adapted, and I think we managed to adapt the social system as well from the point of view of providing those guarantees that the state is to provide for its citizens. But let us not forget that an important part to practice these social guarantees is the financial resource. I shall not mention the organizational resource because it's also something to be paid attention at, but financial resource is the basics. There are many decisions of the Constitutional Court, of the World Courts, which say that every separate situation taking place in this or that country, going through different events, it has certain capacities. And there is no stable situation. We can say that this is what it is, and this is going to last for decades. We understand that the situation is changing. We are to adapt to it. And in the framework of these factors, the state, from my point of view, does everything possible to provide guarantees and rights not only to those citizens who live in the territories controlled by the government, but also to those citizens who are IDPs, who have the status of IDPs today, in order to provide the elementary positions so that people could live normally in such conditions. Thank you. I tried to be brief. Oleksandr, I would like to give floor to Oleksandra Holub, who is the national consultant of the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine. Can you? So we are speaking. I will have more questions to all of you and to Vitaliy Muzychenko as well, but please clarify, maybe not argue, but clarify where such social rights are provided, where the gaps are. But the conversation that is in the sphere of journalism, in the public space, what are the key social rights of people in the conditions of conflict, which cannot be provided, which should be provided, and thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you today. So, in my opinion, the question of social rights is not a matter of the models of services, as you mentioned, when you said that the citizen is a client and the state can think whether or not it is to give those rights. Because in this country, in Ukraine, there's a constitution which defines that Ukrainian citizens have certain rights guaranteed by the state, including social rights. The constitution says that we do have such social rights as the right for social protection, for habitation, for the good level of life, health services, and health insurance. And it's hard to say which of them can be discarded. And we can say that due to the conflict, we cannot guarantee them and provide them. And which we place, which are the priority ones, and which we are to finance first. So, of course, I would like to agree with Vitaliy Muzychenko and say social rights, which is always the subject of the populist discussions, because it's also connected with this allocation of financial resources, organizational resources, and the Ukrainian policies. These matters are often manipulated not but just by citizens, but by politicians. So the assignment of journalists here, they are to be the bridge between the political part and between what is really important for the citizens, and to show how the state provides these social rights, how many funds are allocated, and to which extent these services are covered in this or that hromada or a community, what is the demand in this or that community for this kind of services. So I think the journalists have to dedicate attention to these technical issues, but which are very much important for the average citizens, and a lot depends upon these moments. I would like to talk to our colleague Ivana Roagna, who's international expert of Council of Europe office in Ukraine, and I know that there's translation. That's why she will speak a bit slower, so that the interpreters could translate her. And Ivana is actually the criminal law practitioner, immigration and human rights lawyer. So I'm asking her the same question. So in the conditions of war, in conditions of the conflict, and just in general, today many things are confused. What is social right and what is some requirement of or demand of the voter. Very often the Ukrainian discussions, especially when it's about war, it says that this is like the matter of paying the pension, or the question for this or that political party, or to those people who live on the occupied territories, or access to the education to children from occupied territories. What, in your case, or what rights in the condition of conflict are really the most questionable, and what are the rights among them that we shouldn't ignore, or we shouldn't think that it's a luxury?
Thank you very much for your question and for having invited me to participate in this very interesting discussion. Let me try and answer your question, which is very complex, in a linear way. You were asking which rights cannot be traded or cannot be, should be given priority. When we are talking about human rights in general and social rights in particular, we cannot establish a hierarchy of rights. Meaning, and I'm saying this from an international law perspective, when a certain state enters into an international treaty, it undertakes the obligation to comply with all the obligations that a treaty implies. It was mentioned that the financial element, the financial difficulties were mentioned. Not in the area of social rights, and I will explain to you why, but in the area of civil and political rights. The European Court of Human Rights has stated that lack of financial resources cannot be used as an excuse to avoid full enjoyment of rights by the population. So when it comes to social rights, we should recall that Ukraine has become a state party to the European Social Charter, which is the international instrument that provides the minimum standards that states undertake to provide to people living in their territories in terms of social assistance, in terms of right to housing, in terms of just condition of works, fair remuneration, non-discrimination, etc. Unfortunately, contrary to other international treaties, and I'm referring to the European Convention on Human Rights in the first place, the European Social Charter has a mechanism of enforcement which is not very strong. Contrary to the European Court of Human Rights, it cannot convict states for non-compliance with their obligations. But the European Committee for Social Rights, which is the body entrusted to oversee the implementation of the European Social Charter, issues regular reports and conclusions vis-à-vis certain countries. And if we look at these conclusions and reports by the European Committee of Social Rights related to all those different aspects of the life of individuals, we see that there's no hierarchy of rights. So there's still a confirmation that we cannot say one right has a precedence over the other. And there are still situations of non-compliance with the obligations. And in the case of Ukraine, the pensions, for example, the amount of pension has been constantly found to be below the minimum threshold imposed by the standards of the Council of Europe. So it would be easy to say we should ensure this right before the others. Of course, logically, there are rights that come before the others, those related to the actual life possibility to live of individuals, to have minimum financial resources, to have minimum social security, to have minimum health protection in order to be able to survive. But legally speaking, we cannot say that one right has the precedence over the other. And when it comes to the role of journalists, I think it is extremely important that journalists have an understanding. Of course, they don't have to become lawyers themselves, but they have an understanding of how international obligations work. Because when they look at cases, when they write stories, when they look at situations and are prepared to write an article on them, they have to have the background knowledge about what are governments expected to do. Because guaranteeing human rights, social rights to everybody is not a matter of compassion, is not a matter of pity, it's not a matter of humanity. It is a matter of international obligations. They are not as clear-cut when it comes to social rights when they are in relation to civil and political rights. But still, we can find minimum standards, and we can say the state has to apply such standards.
Я, власне, хотіла поставити питання пану
I would like to ask Vitaliy a question and then probably to discuss certain issues. So, I'm not here only to ask you questions about certain issues such as pensions, but this is probably what worries us. As a journalist, since winter 2014, I remember meeting with Mr. Rosenko in the room where you are right now in the Ministry for Social Policy. We were discussing that it is impossible to pay the same amount of pensions on the non-governmental controlled territories. Unfortunately, this question is highly politicized right now. Can you please tell me, you personally, what do you lack as a public official? Because of this conversation, let me tell you the truth of the conversation between the public officials and the journalists meets the challenge that the ministries that are more social, they say these questions are related to security, related to the military, related to the war, and we say that this is just impossible. But we understand that you are working with something, you do something, you are always busy. So what kind of... You have the opportunity to say, what do you lack? Maybe journalists ask you these questions about ensuring humanitarian rights or human rights in times of a conflict. Maybe there are initiatives, but we just don't know about them. Maybe you just cannot explain us about them. We've been living under the same conditions for the 6th year in a row, and I think by this time we should have understood how to cover these issues. But I feel that like there is a gap, a vacuum in what it comes to issues. We don't really understand everything. Probably we as journalists do something wrong. Maybe it's your fault, maybe you don't explain everything the way you should. Well, I don't know. Maybe we as journalists do something wrong. So, generally, how are you working with this topic? Well, I cannot recommend you how to perform your responsibilities. But I like what Ivana said. She approaches this question in a comprehensive way, and this is exactly what we need to do. If we are now discussing social rights, then of course implementation of these rights, as many other rights on the non-governmental controlled territories, is just impossible. It's a fact. We can discuss it, we can elaborate on that, but because we don't have the institutions that work on the occupied territories, there is a fact that we cannot provide payment of pensions on the occupied territories, which are not controlled by the government of Ukraine. Our condition Our task is to create conditions to provide the citizens of Ukraine, to be able to implement those rights on the uncontrolled territories. There is a special algorithm of actions. Probably some people don't like it, but it is working now. And a lot of citizens of Ukraine use these to implement their rights. Probably not in full. Probably they still experience some discomfort because they need to go through a special procedure to go to the controlled territory. If we're talking about pensioners, but we're not talking about only about pensions, we are talking about other social services. There are some things which we cannot do on the uncontrolled territories. But if we are talking about physical access to Donetsk and Luhansk, no matter how we cover it, we don't have physical access to these cities, to these territories. In some territories, until the April or November 2014, these social payments were made. And I would also discuss some aspects of implementation of social rights. On the surface, we have those payments which are made from the state budget of Ukraine or from the pension fund, social security fund. So these are the funds which are administered by Ukraine, by the state of Ukraine. But there are other aspects which we often forget. This is providing social services in direct understanding. I don't mean administrative services of social character, such as social benefits or pension. It is administrative services. But I mean physical services to reduced mobility, to people with reduced mobility, and to other people. These services can only be provided where people actually live. It doesn't mean that the territorial community is responsible for providing these services. So if a person moves from the uncontrolled territory, they become the part of this new community, and they need to file a request that they need new services. And then the community where this person lives need to provide these services to this inhabitant of the community. This is what integration is about. So this aspect is very important to cover as well. We need to explain to people how the state, if we're talking not only about the government, but about territorial communities, territorial ramadas, we need to talk about how the state can implement its rights. This is not about our desire to do that or not to do that, to implement constitution or provisions of the constitution or provisions of the law. We need to understand that there are special conditions. We need to understand the conditions that we have been living in for the past 6 years. So this is what I would like to say. Svitlana, director of the chair of the Supervisory Board of the National Public Television and Radio Company of Ukraine. I would like to ask also Sasha Holub, who is national consultant of the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine. So our discussion, this is not a discussion in Parliament of Ukraine on how we need to provide to meet the rights, but how we shall cover the providing of these rights. So, in your opinion, what lacks in the discussion, in the media discussion in Ukraine, from the part of the journalists and from the part of the public officials and the government of Ukraine? Thanks a lot for your question. We all already said that covering that covering of this issue is very politicized, and unfortunately, very often when media is covering such issues as paying pensions to people in the occupied territories, we forget about such things as Constitution, European Social Charter, human rights, and this public discussion becomes completely politicized. And it seems like we remove from this discussion the question the question of paying pensions to the citizens of Ukraine. It's actually the right of the citizens of Ukraine. Very often the media, instead of moving this discussion into a constructive dimension, instead of telling how the state can do that, what are the challenges, what resources are lacking in the ministry, the media starts spreading hate speech. Instead of talking about the mechanism of how these rights can be implemented, the media creates or spreads stereotypes about the internally displaced people. This is not a secret that there are a lot of stereotypes like that about IDPs. It seems to me that they are less frequent right now than before, but still they are there. That is why I would like to say that the role of the media is not to spread the hate speech against those people who are discriminated against because of the war in the east of Ukraine and because of the conditions that they are currently in. And now I would like to give word to Svitlana Ostapa. We are talking about social rights, and we started talking about the context that when we have a discussion about paternalism and populism, it is easy for the media, for the politicians, just to say, these are not rights, so this is just populism, people want to march. Or populism say, no, we should have those rights. In the media sphere, the indicator of success is, no matter where you work, the indicator of success, so these are likes, shares, number of views, and rankings. Now we see which media have more shares and likes online. I've been working with this difficult topic for many years. Well, this topic, this issue, is kind of related to everyone. It is relevant for all citizens of Ukraine, but for the media whose indicators of success are clickbaits and number of clicks, they're not really interested. So what is the role of the public broadcaster in this? Because we all know that the public broadcaster also shall be high on the ranking. You also judge your success by the number of likes and shares and views.
And also media that follow these. So greetings to all participants of Donbas Media Forum. So journalists are taught in the institutes and universities the right things, but when they get in the organizations owned by the oligarchs, of course, they face, lots of other challenges because they are sent to go through, some underpants of other to dig into, to get some dirt even sometimes. But speak about social rights is worth doing without humiliating people, including IDPs. It's just that the journalists, when they bring the violation of rights into social sphere, is already protecting them. The role of media in protecting social rights is huge, but it all depends upon the competence of them. Before working on this topic, the journalists have to be familiar with the today, to know the standards of human rights and the link between the domestic and international legal norms, to know about the liabilities of the state authorities and the human rights defenders, public activists, if they help to protect social rights of people, because some media consider that PR. Right now, the Ukrainian journalists, media journalists, they don't know how to correctly highlight or deliver on the topics of human rights in the conflict, in the time of the conflict. In my opinion, this topic is to take the third place after the political and economical. Pay attention attention to the newsreel about people with disabilities, people with HIV. They always go after political scandals. The freedom of media is an important component to protect all other rights. If media is only focused on its audience, they're going to show the way it has to be shown. But if it is focused on shares, likes, and so on, then of course it will be or focused on scandals. With globalization, internet media it gets harder to bring information, because media, they can counteract, of course, the violation of rights of people. And I would like to say that media is an important mechanism, to protect rights and freedoms of people. Most rating TV channels belonging to oligarchs in Ukraine, they try to show problems with providing social rights of people. They even have some mass events when the channels are trying to, for example, make dream of a child with a disabilities, or when they collect money for some surgery, and they do it not on air, right? They do it as additional activities, and pay attention. For example, what we see on TV right now, when the journalists are trying to shoot a woman crying at the funeral to get more trash, the news that are amusing, is like social shows on the different channels. On the public broadcaster, on Suspilne broadcaster, highlighting the social problems is one of the strategic tasks. And here we look better, because Suspilne is trying to increase the social level to these problems with respect to people. On the public broadcaster, they are attracting people or involving people to these programs, for example, involving bloggers, or it was right now the program is mentioned in which the one of the presenters was the person who is in the wheelchair. Also, the journalist Volodymyr Noskov, who has visual impairment. For example, Ukrainian radio, I have several names of the projects. It's called Inclusive World. It's a program for people with disabilities, not indifferent, about active residents of amalgamated communities who are trying to change their villages and cities for better. Or Lines Without Contact Line, the program about IDPs from Crimea and Donbass. The weekly program about the life of the national about the ATO fighters, your rights and the human rights every week. Also, Life Plus everyday program is for proactive pensioners or retired people. Be Healthy every week, a weekly medical program. They are inviting the medical experts to debunk the myths and to popularize the healthy way of life. As a social code, the interactive program about this safety in the social networks. But the Suspilne very rarely has. So let's just say that because they're showing these socially important programs, they do not have high ratings, and they are very often squandered for that. So, fulfilling its mission, Suspilne is always highlighting the situation on the social rights of people in marathons, documentaries, social advertisements. They also is called about another program is called At the Lockdown, that is dedicated to the coronavirus. lockdown. But in general, the radio channels, they have the right to show up to 5% of the social programs, but not so many of them do it. At Suspilne, for the 8 months, they showed 7,000 and something videos about the human rights and freedoms of the citizens on the Independence Day, to the defenders of the motherland, on the safety measures for the elderly against coronavirus, about children, videos about coronavirus, where they give tips, what you do with the advice, how do you laundry, what is the difference between COVID-19 and flu, giving instructions how to wash your hands and so on. So for 100 times they showed social ad about equality in the profession. Okay, Svitlana, I will interrupt you because we have a discussion. Let me finish. So they do not forget about these topics in journalist investigations, which is called Roagna 101, about the house, the house that was destroyed. And several years ago, the monitoring was conducted with by support of the General Consulate of the Germany, of the Institute of Mass Information, and the main aim was to assess, the level of compliance or of covering human rights and the quality of journalist material. So my conclusion: media actually addressing the matter of the human rights, but up to 5% in media is dedicated to this topic. But in our calendar, we have 60 days that can be called as information reasons to highlight the topic of human rights. Thank you for your attention. Okay, thank you. So, Svitlana, you gave us good conclusions. I will give floor to Ivana right now, because we asked you a question: what are the social rights and why they differ from the rights of human rights, and why they are not paid enough attention. But right now, going back to the questions of our discussion, from your experience, from your international experience, what often is missed by the journalists, what the advice would be, and what, from your experience, in your opinion, is the role of journalists to solve these issues? Because the rights, the human rights, there are lots of human rights defenders, but social rights, they're often missed or skipped in the context of the rights, but not privileges. Дуже вам дякую за це запитання.
Making a differentiation between human rights in general and social rights. Sometimes when I talk about the European Social Charter, which is the main treaty within the European continent dealing with social rights, I talk about a Cinderella treaty. A treaty that very few people know, very few people are familiar with, and as a consequence, people don't know how much they can expect from the state. And this is a widespread problem across all European countries. Let me. Okay, now I wanted to share with you something. What you asked me, what should journalists do in order to, which responsibilities journalists have in relation?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah. I said, like, what they also could, not just should.
I don't hear you.
Кажу, що би ви...
Okay, what they could, yes.
Yeah.
What they could do, they could start wearing social rights glasses, just like these glasses, that allow me to see the screen in a better light, to see not a blurred image of you, but to see the full picture. What are the social rights glasses? These are glasses that allow journalists to look at the context in which certain situations occur, and not limiting themselves to report on a situation, but to go further, to see the full picture, in focus, and ask themselves what are the obligations of the state in relation to the demands of the citizens, or in relation to a situation that has been detected. Because the critical thinking is necessary. It's not just about reporting on a law, on a situation, but asking yourself, what will be the impact of this law or this situation on people with disabilities, for example, or people from marginalized groups, or elderly. In relation to the COVID emergency, all states try to protect elderly with blanket provisions, saying all people above the age of 60, 65, 70, depending on the time of the emergency, have to stay at home, without thinking how this ban on restriction of movement affected the social rights of the elderly, the right to have adequate health assistance, to get medical treatment, routine medical treatment, not ordinary, not exceptional medical treatment. So human rights and social rights lenses could be worn regularly by journalists in order to take stories to the next level, to deepen the focus of the story, not focusing only on the situation, but looking at which are the obligations of the employers, for example, in terms of provision of equal pay or non-discrimination. It's not just sufficient to talk about discrimination of women in employment, but to understand what the governments should do also vis-a-vis private employers to end this discrimination, collect information and spread information about how is this discrimination wide in a certain country. Request for statistics, for example, and look at the statistics and read them for the readers, because readers need to be illustrated things. And of course, I'm not a journalist, so I don't want to enter into the merits of the work of journalists. But readers need to be instructed, need to be made aware also of certain rights. With the Council of Europe, we are conducting at the moment a research on an assessment on the implementation of Article 20.
Yeah, we do hear you. Ми вас чуємо, все гаразд. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, to the right of social protection of people, elderly people, and we realize that many elderly people are actually not aware of the minimum standards that should apply to the social protection they are entitled to under national legislation and international practice. So the role of journalists should be to wear these social rights glasses and to ensure that they contribute to the public interest, that is issues that matter everyone in society.
Я все ж таки в цій дискусії дуже хочу бути
I would like to be useful in this discussion for the journalists who work locally, who probably don't have access to wider information. Now, I would continue the discussion and ask Svitlana. Within the past few months, I've been working a lot with regional journalists, with local journalists, and I see that uh, uh, they are sometimes a bit scared or afraid when we are talking about social problems in the regions. They don't quite understand how to discuss it properly without promoting the local government, the local foundations, or something like that. So it seems to me that they are a bit scared because, from on one hand side, they are afraid that they once again tell about inhabitants of a village who don't have access to urgent medical help, or they cover problems with water sewage or something like that. Well, now I'm talking about social issues, not actually about rights, but providing access to public health is very important in villages, for example. So, do you have at the level of your supervisory board, at the level of management, do you have any recommendations and advice on how to solve this issue? Because, yes, we have a discourse in the society that people are sick and tired of complaints. But what if they don't complain? How they can solve the issues that they have? How do you differentiate the stories where people are afraid if state does something, journalists cover it, then journalists might be blamed for promoting the state or one of the candidates? People just don't do that. They're afraid to do that. The same question is related to pensions in the Donbass. In 2015, for example, several dozens people died near the control point. All of the recommendations are written in our charter, or editorial charter. They are also listed in other documents. But when it comes to practice, we did have some problems with that. I don't think that all of these issues have been tackled. Public broadcaster in the regions was created on the basis of the central state television. They promoted the central authorities or regional authorities. That's why when the new team came to Suspilne, to the public broadcaster, that wanted to tackle this issue. But as you say, they were a bit afraid. Sometimes they were afraid to get commentaries from the local government. But right now, the task of every journalist who wants to get a comment from the authorities, they need to think first whether this comment would be interesting for the audience, whether it will help to inform the audience on the issue that is being discussed. And we need to closely follow what the local authorities say, what their representatives say to your question. Do they promote themselves or do they tell what is needed? You can just remove the PR part and leave the answer to the question. As for the responsibilities of the local authorities, if a journalist knows that the local authority has to complete certain tasks and they don't do that, of course, they can ask why. But there are situations when our people who are quite paternalistic, who have been paternalistic from the Soviet Union, they think that the government has to provide everything, to do everything, even in those questions, those issues where the state doesn't have to do that. For example, if inhabitants of a multi-apartment building have created an association of homeowners. The state that doesn't have anything to do with them. They need to do everything by myself. That is why I would like to say that the journalist shall know well all the information, all the background information, and to ask the right questions, not to promote or to promote public officials, but to inform the population. Sometimes there are situations when, for example, the school has been renovated for 10 years, and then the authorities come, they just launch the opening of the school, and voila, it's like they did it, but it's wrong. That is why journalists need to be professional and well informed, and only then their materials will be useful for the audience. We have a question from our participants, from Olga Vesnyanka, a journalist who writes a lot about human rights, about Roma rights. She said that after a survey on Roma rights in the east of Ukraine, it turned out that there are a lot of negative stereotypes against Roma people. Do you think that how do you think local media shall cover the rights of the Roma people in Donbass, especially when it comes to issues related to public health or education? This question is broader. According to the new legislation, will there be any punishments for the hate speech, such as, for example, broadcasting of a pogrom of a Roma settlement? So probably my question would be to Sasha. Sasha, can you please start answering this question? But I would like to be a discussion. So I would also like to ask Vitaliy, inside the ministry, what's your opinion at covering these issues? How do you raise the issue of discrimination? Do you have any programs or policies for example, for the workers, for the employees of the social services? Do you teach them how to talk with people? Because unfortunately, there are a lot of biases and stereotypes. Maybe Oleksandra, Sasha, you can start. I would like to say that the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine has been working in this direction, in fighting the stereotypes for many years. Olga Vesnyanka, who asked this question, is also part of this work. There was a textbook for the media on how to fight stereotypes when covering national minorities and gender issues in Ukraine. This textbook is available online for free. You can find it on the website of the Council of Europe in Ukraine. And I would also like to say that we need to remember, when we are talking about those groups that face discrimination related to the conflict in Ukraine, or in general, all over Ukraine, who live not only in the east but all over Ukraine. There are groups which face a lot of discrimination. There might be persons who are Roma people, IDPs, women, and people with disability. So if this person can face 4 types of discrimination at the same time, because all of these, because there are a lot of stereotypes towards it. Because of that, we have quite a lot of situations, in addition to living in the conflict zone. These groups are discriminated by their ethnicity or their mobility or something like that. That is why journalists shall pay attention to it. Why journalists should care about the social rights? Because according to a survey, if people ask, where do you go when your rights are violated? 28% of the people say that you need to reach out to the media, not to the police, not to the lawyer, but to the media. So I think that the media shall understand that people actually trust in them. people, your listeners or watchers, or in general your consumers, they need to understand that media does something for their benefit. Well, my question is more for the responsibility for the use of the hate speech. So, Vitaliy, can you please inform us whether you have any policies or recommendations inside the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine? Do you have any efficient measures or programs to counter discrimination, to provide the opportunity for the social workers all around Ukraine to fight their stereotypes? We journalists, together with colleagues, we also carried out an opinion poll among doctors that not all of the family doctors are ready to work with LGBT people or with transgender people. So my question is, social workers, they might be excellent social workers, or they might have excellent attitude to some people, but still they might have stereotypes which are widespread in the Ukrainian society. They might be racist or against Roma people. So how do you tackle this issue? I do understand that you are not a politician, you are a public official, but try to answer this question. Well, I'm a politician because Deputy Minister of Social Policy is. We're not public officials. We are politicians as well. There are some differences in different positions. After listening to the discussion, of course, every society has its system of stereotypes, which has been based on individual or mass events which had been happening in the society before. So, for example, you mentioned national minority, Roma people. Well, we don't say that we have this position towards Roma, and we have no stereotypes against Romanian, Polish, or Hungarian community. Roma people are just one of the national minorities who live on the territory of Ukraine, but we pay too many attentions towards it. Of course, there are stereotypes in the society, but these stereotypes are based on something. They must have preconditions. You mentioned public health system and social system. These are the systems that shall provide the basis for people's life. The quality of providing these services have impact on life of citizens or families. Of course, we control this situation. We have a system of monitoring the rights of Roma people, including in several regions of Ukraine, in specific regions of Ukraine, because we understand that in some regions of Ukraine, this situation is worse than anywhere else because of the way of life these people lead, because of the attitude of the local community towards these groups of people, depending on their impact on the community. But I wouldn't highlight a certain category or a national minority. I would like to say that the system of stereotypes towards certain categories of people, because you said that one person can belong to several categories.
It might be not on the basis of some social studies, but what the topics on social rights could be very useful right now, which sound in the way where they need to be corrected, where there would be even use, from the journalists for the society. Because summing up, we are speaking about a lot about this disinformation, that the journalist loses its influence. But the pandemics show that people clearly understand that there is useful information, that journalists can provide useful information. And in that journalism, there are, are where we prevail. I understand that you cannot define all of the problems of the country, but just give me 1, 2, 3. I will give floor to each of you. Could you please just name the things that need more attention according to you? Or you think that it has to be enhanced because it's already done by media, but it needs more attention? So I give floor to Oleksandra first because I think that she's probably ready sooner than others. I just wanted to say that it would be wonderful if media was highlighting in its reports and materials the role of vulnerable groups of the population, like people with disabilities, the senior people, IDPs, not and they shouldn't be viewed as victims of the conditions, but as active participants of life of our country, as active participants of life of the community. And it's very important to debunk the stereotypes about these people, to destroy the stereotypes. And I would like to talk to the editors who are listening to us right now. Please invite these people who belong to discriminated groups as experts, heroes, heroines, not only for in the stories that refer to their disabilities, or not only asking women talking about child upbringing or some domestic, duties, but please involve them to discussions of all problems so that your broadcasting was inclusive. And it will help to all us as your audience to obtain the inclusive picture of the entire world, which will allow to make the country more inclusive. Thank you. Oleksandra, the thing is that you dropped out a bit. So now I will give floor to Vitaliy. I understand that maybe you can tell me that you have priorities, or if you don't have priorities, or you will say that everything is important and complex, but still, what do you work with? What are the priority questions in this context? And after what we are going through, I mean, wanted to say what we have gone through, but what we are going through, what are the biggest challenges according to you? So if we speak about the all-national priorities, so we speak the first is the payments and compensations. Part of agenda is decentralization, and for us not to lose what we have already gained in the social development when transferring powers. And I think this priority has to be followed at the end of this year. And if we speak about summing up the position and media participation in this process, then I would like to mention that a big part of the society that needs social support position as those who are provided for or who receive care, but I also want to view them as those who make contributions, because we have a very powerful civil movement where there are people with disabilities, because protection of rights of certain categories is not just journalism, but we have many civil organizations created to fight for, to talk about needs in the social aspect as well. This aspect has to be developed.
Ivana, you here in Ukraine.
Отож, Ivana, okay, sorry, I switched to English automatically, but I will ask a question to you, to Ivana. So you're here. What do you think is the most important thing that you pay attention to within the context that we are now here, September 2020? What are the things that maybe were not noticed, which seem to you insufficiently covered by the media or anybody who is working with such issues? Я хотіла би попросити вас, прошу вас повторити питання, бо я пропустила першу частину. I would like you to explain what are the priority topics or issues on social rights for Ukraine, or those topics that maybe we haven't noticed yet or do not receive enough attention. Я не думаю, що я знаю ситуацію в Україні настільки, щоб бути спроможною дати вам якусь таку повномасштабну відповідь на ваше запитання. Але, звісно,
to a previous question that you made to the representative of the Ministry of Social Rights, related to hate speech and bias attitude of social workers or state representatives. I think that one of the key messages, one of the key points, which is cross-cutting, that has to be paid more attention to, is that there are certain principles which are non-negotiable. And non-discrimination and hate speech are non-negotiable. So we can discuss about the extent to which social support can be given to certain categories. We can discuss about the difficulties in providing adequate health care system to the population, but at the bottom level, there is the fact that services, social services, rights have to be enjoyed with no discrimination at all. And this is not something that can be tolerated. So the state, and I go back again to that question that you made, which was very important in my opinion, has to make sure that reactions are put in place when discriminatory, intolerant attitudes are displayed, because non-discrimination and expressions of discrimination such as hate speech are non-negotiable. So this is not something we can discuss and argue.
В нас з'явилося ще одне дуже важливе питання, але, Світлана, якщо ви готові дуже коротко, я потім все одно...
We have another important question to Svitlana. Svitlana, you can sum up as well. I have several messages I would like to mention. So the journalists have to highlight these topics of social rights and social problems, and this will add trust to them for journalists in media, because now in our society we have a crisis of trusting certain organizations, and the statistics show that the trust to mass media has also dropped as compared to the previous years. Apart from that, they have such categories of people who have some problems or they need protection. They are to be shown not as show them as part of the society, not separately, because today you are healthy, but tomorrow you can be a person with a disability. Today you're just a regular girl, but tomorrow you can be a mother of 10, you know. And maybe not all people get into a certain situation every day when their rights must be protected. So I don't like when the news was prepared by some national minority only for this national minority. It has to be communicated to the entire society. The society is to hear about them, about you. And second message, you have to follow how the problems are solved. And I mean, those problems the journalists talk about in their material, whether or not there is a reaction. If some official was, was if it if he was found guilty in some scheme, that he has to be punished. So you have to not just a journalist is not to inform some scandal fact, but he is to follow up if that person was brought to responsibility, if these person's rights were protected or not.
And I also would like to ask another important question to Vitaliy. I know that I've already asked this question. There are people who say that human rights in the occupied territories shall not be implemented because it shall be the responsibility of the occupying power. Do you share this opinion? Well, I'm not expressing my opinion. I would ask other participants to react to this thought. Well, as of now, you asked this question and you are smiling. It is a provocative question because I already answered this question in my previous replies. We cannot provide respect of these rights in the occupied territories. It seems like you had an apartment, you had a flat, and then somebody forces you out of it. So you're forced out of your apartment, and then you cannot respect the rights of those people who live in this flat. We would like to do that. We know that there are citizens of Ukraine living in the territory. But you, as journalists, please tell us how to do that. Well, of course, we are discussing as part of the Donbas Media Forum. This is a special platform for discussion where we discuss very painful issues. But there is another issue, another question of so-called positive discrimination for students or people who are displaced. There are internet services. Sometimes people have to move out of the occupied territory, but you are not registered, so you cannot move out of there. There is the issue of access. There is the issue of physical access to the territory of Ukraine. There is the issue on how to get a certificate of birth or death of a person, which is valid for those people who have already died after the war or were born after the war. We all understand that in modern world there are questions which are related to physical presence, that there are things that can be done online and offline. There are also the issues of social security and internet security. So how do you think? What is the responsibility of the occupying power? But what is still the responsibility of the Ukrainian authorities before those people who still have Ukrainian passports? We have the Geneva Convention, which stipulates that the occupying power bears all the responsibility for the territory that it occupied, all the territory and the inhabitants who live on that territory. Okay, these are citizens of Ukraine, and we need to create conditions for respect of the human rights on the territory which has been occupied. The facts of birth and death can be done. Right now, the court system works in a simplified regime to be able to do that. Every citizen of Ukraine has the right to free movement all across Ukraine. To do that, you don't have to be on a special list. This person can provide the documents they have. There are no limitations on the movement around Ukraine for the citizens of Ukraine, except limitations which are set during the lockdown measures, but they are not related to the war in the east. These are limitations which are uh, implemented in different parts of Ukraine in relation to the zone, to the lockdown zone. So we cannot say that people cannot implement their rights. I saw your reactions, Ivana. Do you have any reaction or any comment on this question on who is responsible for respecting the rights of people living on the occupied territory, the occupying power or the state?
Well, from an international law perspective, it is a very complex issue because if we look, for example, at the European Convention on Human Rights, Civil and Political Rights, which also encompass, all aspects of life that you mentioned, birth certificates and getting identity paper, etc., freedom of movement that was mentioned by the other panelists, etc. Well, there's a strict regime applicable. If a country believes that they cannot provide full enjoyment of those rights because of an occupation by a foreign territory, they should enter a reservation with the Council of Europe, with the Secretary General of the Council of Europe. But that has a lot of political implications because it means recognizing that the territory of the state is lost. So there are legal avenues that are available, but the political implications often overcome the legal possibilities because of the consequences also in terms of international diplomacy, etc. So the situation is very complex. As a human rights lawyer, not a politician, of course, I say, well, there is a legal answer. But I understand that governments do not necessarily apply immediately, and this is not something that touches only on Ukraine, but also touched other countries of the Council of Europe because of the implications.
Дякую всім. Скажу, певна є перевага онлайн-дискусії.
Thanks a lot. Well, I think there is a benefit of online discussions because usually they don't last as long as offline discussions. I am grateful for this discussion. I would like it to be useful for all the participants, for all of you. This was a discussion about covering human social rights as an example of public interest journalism at Donbas Media Forum. My name is Nataliya Gumenyuk. I am grateful to all of you, so please follow the news and follow our discussions today. Thank you. Bye.